Hello and welcome to the Empower Yourself Summit. My name is Pamela McAlexander and I will be your host. I have a wonderful guest with me today and she is from Canada and she and I were talking earlier, and if you don't know anybody from Saskatchewan and know that is not a made-up name, that is really where she lives, you now will know somebody from there. My special guest today is Elan Morgan, and she also goes by the name of Schmutzy. I'm saying that properly, right? And yes. She does live in Saskatchewan, Canada. She is a writer, designer, and speaker who runs the schmutzy.com group of blogs. And for anyone who doesn't know what a blog is, I'll let her get into explaining all of that. But she actually was anonymous online for almost 7.5 years under this name. And it was because she didn't want anybody to know who she was. And yet everybody knows her as that name because, as she'll tell you, she's considered a dinosaur in the blogging industry because of how long she's been doing this. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Elan.
Sorry, your volume cut out there for a second.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we're introducing you, Elan Morgan. Can you hear me okay now?
Hello.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, and basically, Elan, what we're doing the summit on obviously surrounds around empowering yourself, conquering your fears, eliminating self-doubt, taking back your power, and achieving the life of your dreams. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a struggle story of what you went through, what it felt like, what you did to get through it, to being where you are right now today, doing what it is that you're truly passionate about and you love to do.
Oh, well, that's a big question. It was actually one of the major struggles in my life that started the ball rolling towards me forging my own career, quitting office work, coming out of the closet blogging-wise. I was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 2007, and it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And it turned out I had a few more cancer spots than they assumed, and so I ended up having to go in for a hysterectomy, which I wasn't expecting. Nobody. It's like nobody. Nobody expects the Inquisition. Nobody expects a hysterectomy. So I ended up being pretty much flat on my back for about 6 months. I was tired, and I tried going back to work, but I worked in a very stressful office environment, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I think a lot of people that go through a struggle like that find that. You go back to old situations that you used to think were no big deal, and you realize, wait, my life is kind of bigger and more important than this. Not because I'm bigger and more important, but I've only got one trip around the sun, and I want to do this right. So I went on stress leave, and I fell into a major depression for quite a long time. And then the thing that turned me around, and it was 2008 when I started a gratitude practice. And what it was is I was seeing a therapist at the time, and she said that I blew everything out of proportion. That, when I made anything, I spent 6 months making it. When I started a website, I told the whole world about it. I couldn't just do anything small. So she said, I just want you to list 5 things a day that you don't hate. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And I went home and I started a website called Grace in Small Things. It's still running. It's a small gratitude community. And I invited 1,000 people.
Wow.
And I wrote my first gratitude post. And the next week when I went to see that therapist, she said, I saw what you did. You blew it all out of proportion again. But it's amazing. I hit a really low point when, I had such body-changing surgery, but
when I started writing that gratitude list, and some days it was hard to think of 5 things I didn't hate. A lot of days it was. But I did it every day for that first year. And I started to realize that it was becoming a habit. I was actually looking around to look for things that I enjoyed, that I liked, that I loved. And I started making different choices in my life because of that. And that's when everything else started changing for me.
Wow. That is a very neat story. So let me ask you this. When you said that you were anonymous for the first 7.5 years, explain to everybody what a blog is, first and foremost. For anybody that may not know, because I know we have some people, you know, myself included, who's not a blogger. So for those of us who don't know, who are still living in the dinosaur age, tell us what a blog is.
Blog is pretty much any website that has chronological entries in reverse order. So the latest entry is first, and the oldest entry is last, with a comment section.
Okay, so it's...
And that's pretty much what a blog is.
Kind of just a thought for the day, and I just put it out there.
Well, some people just have a thought for the day. Some people blog about politics. Some people, there's a lot of pet blogs out there. Some people chronicle their struggles with illness. It can be anything you want it to be.
Okay, and so when you were blogging anonymously, 1, explain to us why, and 2, explain to us the kind of things you were blogging, and is that why?
Well, when I started, I was 30. Yeah, I was 30 years old. It was 2003, and ever since I was a little kid, I'd been writing poetry and short stories and filled so many paper journals, but I'd hidden it all. I almost felt a sense of shame if anybody read it. I was so afraid of not being good enough. But in 2003, it didn't feel like there was almost anybody blogging. It seriously felt like there were maybe 6 people, because I think I read 6 blogs, and that's all I knew existed. So it felt safe. I could put it out there, 6 people would see it, and they wouldn't know who I was. So that's why I started doing it. It turns out that there's a lot more than 6 people out there now that read websites. But yeah, that's why I started. And part of the reason I was anonymous was that sense of shame. But part of it, too, was I come from a fairly conservative background. I'm Mennonite on both sides. Not the kind that lives on farm colonies, but we live in cities, but just more conservative. You know, no drinking, no dancing, and we're fairly socially conservative. We don't share a lot of our personal dirty laundry out in public. And I had kind of a wild youth that I was occasionally writing about, and I didn't want my parents to know.
So you went on the computer where you know they weren't going to go to see it?
Yeah.
So in your case, it was almost like journaling thoughts and feelings and opinions about things. And did it give you a sense of peace to know, okay, I got this off my chest. It's out there should somebody see it. You know, it's not like a private diary journal where I'm writing it in a book and the only person that's ever going to see it is me. That takes a lot of guts to put that out there, doesn't it?
There are a lot of times, and still today, there are a lot of times where I hover over that publish button. And I'm nervous. I am so nervous.
So you don't follow that when in doubt, do without?
No, I don't follow that. In fact, I think that most of the time you should do the opposite. But that'll get you in hot water. I do admit. But I find that when it comes to being afraid to publish something that I've written, it's usually because I feel vulnerable. And so I look at why I feel vulnerable. And if I'm feeling vulnerable because I think I will be judged, not because it's not an important story, but because I think I will be judged for it, I take a moment and I think, if somebody judges me poorly, do I still stand by what I wrote? And if I do, I hit publish.
Awesome. What a nice way to look at it. Because really what you're doing is you're getting your opinion out there. And who knows, there could be a lot of other people that share that opinion. They're just too scared to, acknowledge it or whatever. But this gives them a somewhat, I don't know, can you really call the internet safe? A safe environment to agree?
Well, the biggest power I find in blogging and in the more social end of social media as well is the power of Me Too. When somebody speaks something that is true for them and you see it and you felt that or you live like that and you think that you are the only one and you see that person out there, you're like, I'm not alone. And then you see, and you might not even comment. They may never know you exist, but you see 30 people comment on it or people share the link to that post and you realize there are this many more people and you're no longer alone. And that gives you courage, knowing that you're not the only one to stand up.
Now, what makes this different than, like, you know how sometimes people just sort of, you know, put their life out there on Facebook? And, you know, everybody's always making the negative comments. Oh, seriously, do we really want to hear all of your woes on Facebook? Okay, what makes this different? Because you're dealing with websites?
What makes it different is on Facebook, you're broadcasting it to everybody a little bit differently. Anybody who comes to my site has chosen to click on it, and usually the title gives some indication what it's going to be. On Facebook, if I put my woes down, it just sort of shows up in somebody's feed, and they didn't necessarily choose to see it because Facebook chooses what you get to see. So,
but I like this.
I feel.
Go ahead.
Pardon?
I said, go ahead. You feel?
Oh yeah. Well, on my website, it's my house, right? And so I can sort of, if somebody doesn't like it, I can block their comments. I can delete them. It's my house. You know, I expect people to wipe their feet and behave nicely when they come in. And you can make those kinds of rules in your own house. So I like that. There's a freedom there.
Okay, so basically what you do when that piece of being a writer and a designer, you actually design websites and you design them in a way where they fit into that natural talent that you have of blogging?
Usually, I sometimes have designed websites for sites that don't have blogs in them, but I usually do for blogs, and I try to fit them around that person's personality, the level of privacy they want, showcasing what they want people to see about them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very much like designing your living room when you're going to have friends over.
I like that. So tell me a little bit about schmutzy.com.
Schmutzy.com. It has all of my archives with all of my writing back to 2003. So there's 11 and a half years of archives in there. I've got 4 different blogs on there. I have my personal blog, which I use to include my personal stories, some how-tos. I do tutorials for how to do different things online, sometimes how to cook different kinds of food, just whatever occurs to me. And then I also have a poetry blog, photography blog for iPhone photography, and I also have a blog that's just devoted to a weekly roundup of great blog entries from around the web that the community submits. So anybody can come and submit really great writing that they found online.
Oh, wow. And that's a nice resource then. And then when you deal with other people who hire you for the purpose of designing a website, I mean, like what extent of involvement do you get in with them as to what they're looking to do?
Well, I have a questionnaire that seems very vague, but it helps me discern what kind of shapes they like, what kind of colors, what other kinds of websites they like, what they want included in their site. And then I also usually send along another questionnaire which helps me understand what their main goals are for themselves with the site, how they want to use the site, how they want people who come to the site to use it, how they want it to change what they do, because that will almost always happen when you change your website. And then I dig in and start designing. And I also usually do the coding part as well, so I get into the technical nitty-gritty and build it.
Okay, so basically, you know, some people who are, and I'm not going to say new to the internet, but, you know, we have all age groups now. I mean, my own father was using a phone like an iPhone before I ever advanced to that. So, it's like some of us just kind of go into technology kicking and screaming. But websites aren't just for advertising businesses anymore. Not from what you're telling me with regards to what you utilize yours for. So how could somebody, is this almost an awesome form of therapy or what? That somebody could create a website and run with it.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of people I've talked to about, and I think of it as the power of personal narrative. And I looked into it a bit when I wrote my TED Talk, because it was something that I had discovered, and I had been doing on my own for years already at that point, but over 7 years. And I looked it up, and I think it was something, and I can't tell you who came up with it at the time, but it was, I think, around the 1970s or 80s. There were therapists who started engaging in narrative therapy, and it's still a therapy that you can find therapists who practice today, and it is about telling your own story and writing your own story. Because what happens when you tell your own story is that you own it. You really have to look at why you're telling it the way you are, why you're including certain elements, why you're making some characters look some way and others another way. You really have to look at your relationships with people. It's amazing what happens when you start even telling simple, funny stories. I've discovered some really beautiful things about my relationship with my husband, just documenting we have really absurd conversations because he's got an absurd sense of humor. And every once in a while I'll write those down, and I'll realize, something beautiful that we share that maybe I didn't see before. Simply the act of writing. It's amazing the power that it has.
I know that when I work with a lot of my clients, one of the things that we utilize as part of that work in progress is what I like to call journal burning. And not physically burning your journal, but when you've got negative thoughts or negative feelings and you just want to get rid of them, the best way in which to do it is to, write it all down on a piece of paper and then burn that piece of paper, because now it's off your chest and we've just, it's almost that symbology of, okay, I got it out, now it's gone, now let's move on.
Yep.
So with blog posts or creating personal narratives, you have the ability to get out there things that either you've always wanted to say or just like you said, it's amazing the number of people that agree with you or that think the same thing but thought they were alone in this world with those thoughts. So I think that's really awesome. So I have another question for you. So in that TED Talk that we were talking about, you had spoken in front of a large group. And in that comment that you made with regards to self-doubt being a speed bump and a tool that we can use, would you mind elaborating on that? Because I don't think anybody's ever looked at self-doubt as being a good thing, but you really put a spin on it that I liked and appreciated.
Well, one thing that I find we often do is we take negative emotions and decide that they're bad. And I don't agree with that at all. I mean, they may feel bad, but it doesn't mean that they're bad. They may be serving a purpose. Because, I mean, as we've evolved physically and spiritually, emotionally and psychologically as human beings, these things stick around for a reason. And up until 2010, I'm going to be reaching my 4th year of sobriety in August, which I'm very excited about. But up until 2010, I had been drinking quite heavily for about 20 years, which is a long time. And I started to really notice, and this was after my gratitude practice again, I was starting to really take notice of the beautiful things in my life. And some of the uglier things in my life were really starting to seem ugly, in comparison. And that's the wonderful thing about noticing beautiful things is you start to figure out what are the ugly things that you can weed out. And one of those was I realized I was an alcoholic. And I was feeling this terrible burning shame up the back of my neck a lot, like every day. So I thought, well, I'm going to take notice of that. I'm going to take note. When is that happening? Why is that happening? And it was happening around alcohol. It was happening around people that I drank with. And I started to realize that the sense of shame and self-doubt that I had been plagued with for so many years was telling me something. But I had been running away from that negative feeling rather than really laying it on the table and looking at it. So when I started to look at the purpose of that, these things that I ran away from, fear, self-doubt, shame, those, depressing thoughts, I realized, they're coming from somewhere, and that somewhere is something that I can change. That's the purpose of this. It set up a roadblock for me. It set up a signpost. And one of the great things, too, is when you realize the things you're doing that aren't working for you, you start to more clearly see the things you can do that will work for you. You start to see your abilities start to uncover themselves as you move away from the things that you no longer like. So looking at self-doubt, laying it on the table, and basically doing an autopsy of all of these fears I had, which is a terrifying thing to do, but really worth your while, I started to realize, and at first it was hard. I realized a lot of places where I'd failed, but I also realized a lot of places where I wasn't failing, the good things that I could cleave to. It was a really powerful turning point for me.
Wow, so you did the gratitude thing on a daily basis for a year, and then you delved into those fears and self-doubts and studied them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. And did you find, was that like a pivotal moment in your life where you grew as a person? What did you find when you delved that deep? Gratitude thing for about a year. And then you went into the mode of delving into the self-doubt, just really pulling up and surfacing what was buried.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like? That had to be scary because, of course, we bury things that we have issues with on purpose so we don't have to deal with them.
Yeah. There was a long period of time where I did not hold down any sort of official job. I didn't work in the office anymore. I did some occasional part-time work, but I was going through a tough time. And I decided to treat it like I was going through a really long, cold. That I needed to get well. And I needed to treat myself well and figure out what was going on. And I was very lucky. I have a husband who supported this activity. He didn't have much of a choice, but he was very supportive. And yeah, and it was a long haul going through that. It was very difficult. I was dealing with a lot of difficult feelings after an abusive work environment, difficult feelings from having gone through that period of time with cancer. My husband had a broken back during that same year I had cancer, so there had been a really stressful few years there. And then realizing that I was an alcoholic as well. And there were a lot of things to come to terms with. You sort of have to come to terms with who you are now after what you've come through and really take ownership of the control you have over who you are now and who you will become. Those are hard things to do.
So what was the...
Again, I cannot stress enough how important it is to do that, go through that mess. It's really worth it.
So what was the driving force that made dealing with that pain and surfacing all of that more important than burying it? Because when we're faced with that, okay, I can either leave my life go status quo, which I've gotten used to and I've gotten comfortable with even though I don't like it, or I can choose to surface all this stuff, really put myself under a microscope and deal with it. Where's that driving force?
I think a couple of things brought that to a head. One thing is that even though the cancer I'd had was mild, when a doctor says cancer to you and you have to go through major surgery, you face death. There's just nothing, that's what you're looking at, and
the potential for that. And I also know that for the rest of my life, I've got a higher chance of having cancer again. And so there was that idea, really, that I could die. We don't have all of this time. Like, we are not given a wealth of time. We feel like we are, but we are not. And my alcoholism had reached a point that I never felt well anymore. It had reached a point where it was all I thought about all day when I wasn't drinking. It was all I thought about while I was drinking. I woke up feeling sick, drank till I felt sick. It was a terrible cycle. And I realized this is going to be it. This is going to be my legacy. I'm going to be the person who parked her butt at the end of a bench and everybody yelled, "Norm," like cheers, you know. And they did that for me when I walked in. And I thought, I don't want to be that person. I can't be that person. Even if I have very little more to offer than that, I still have more to offer than that. And so I decided that living that way was painful, and choosing not to live that way was going to be painful, but one had hope in it and the other didn't. So
I like that. Thank you for sharing that. Basically, if you had one piece of advice or guidance or wisdom that you could share with our listeners today that would help them start their journey on empowering themselves and really digging deep within themselves and using those very tools that we fear, fear, self-doubt, all of these negative things that we fear, what would it be?
A lot of time when we talk about empowering ourselves and becoming greater and achieving our goals and passions and enlivening our spirits, we focus on all these really positive end goals. And I think a lot of us, when we're at the beginning, and I'm always at the beginning of a new journey, there's new things I'm dealing with now, In fact, over the last couple of days that have knocked me, back on my butt, because this happens again and again in life. But you find yourself at that beginning phase and you think, I can't be that person who's done all of this, or how, it's impossible. I can't get there. Know that they went through a messy point, and it's okay to get messy. It's okay to get really down deep into the dirty stuff about yourself and work through it. It's not all going to look like sunshine and rainbows and puppies. It's not going to be tidy and clean, because, and the fact is that you're probably not going to end up where you thought you wanted to head anyway. I never was going to be a web designer. I was never going to be a blogger. In fact, public speaking is one of my biggest fears on the planet. And now, this is what I do. I never would have forecast this for myself, but it's the things I love the most now. So, yeah, take the time to get really messy.
Awesome. Well,
that's my best advice.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate your time here today and everything that you have shared with our listeners. And at the in the email that we send to our listeners, they will have the opportunity to access your website directly. And so they'll have your web link there, any connection to you. And I highly recommend that you go out on her website and check her out and check out some of these blog posts, because you'd be amazed that, some of it could be stuff that you yourself have kept buried all these years. And, to go, hey, look, there's more than just me that thinks this way. I just think that is so resourceful. So I do so appreciate the time that you gave us all today. And if there's anything else you'd like to share, we're certainly open to it. Otherwise, we just really appreciate you being on the summit with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having such a great conversation. It's amazing what comes out when people ask you questions you haven't been asked before, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I enjoyed it. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Elan.
Thank you.